We're trying to talk to different parties in the government to make sure that there is a law in place that what happened to me will not happen to anybody else, and that any British citizen has got right to counsel protection. But of course, there is no guarantee that this will not happen to anybody else.
Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was held as a hostage by the Iranian regime for 6 years. Arrested on holiday with her infant daughter, she was falsely convicted of security charges. Her prison term was extended after Boris Johnson mistakenly claimed she was in Iran to train journalists. A worldwide campaign, during which both Nazanin and her husband went on hunger strike, demanded her release. Finally set free after the British government agreed to settle a £400 million debt with the Islamic Republic, she now advocates for the release of other British citizens held in prison in Iran. We are absolutely honoured to have her here today, so please join me in welcoming Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. Thank you. Firstly, thank you very, very much for joining us. We're thrilled to have you here.
Thank you.
Could you just describe what that reunion moment between your husband and your daughter felt like after so many years?
Yes, so obviously it was 6 years that we were separated from each other. It was very strange in a way that when I left, my daughter was not 2, and when I came back, she was 8. The world has gone through COVID. It was a completely different world. And 6 years, I think, is a very long time for people to change. And I found the world that I came to very different to the world that I left. People had changed. My daughter had grown. It took a long time to adjust to the new life. But also, I think, more than that, it was as if I had to then get to know my immediate family again, just because it was a very long time that we were separated.
And what has that process of adjusting to life back in the UK been like? Do you think you can ever go back to kind of normality?
Well, the question is whether I would want to go back to the normality that I left before I went to Iran and then to prison. I think prison had changed me in many different ways, but I have learned how to understand people's pain more than any other time in my life when I was in prison in Iran. And also I came back realizing that there is more into life than just having a job and going to the office and getting paid and planning holidays and doing things. I think there is more to life, and I don't think it's very easy to talk about prison. It's much easier to talk about prison when you are out of prison. Whereas if I had imagined that one day I would be sitting here talking about prison in this way, I probably would have laughed at myself. But I think prison is like a crash course in a way that you learn about life in a way that you would have otherwise not known. That everything is temporary. There is no tomorrow. If you plan for tomorrow, for next year, for the next 5 years, it doesn't mean anything because there is no tomorrow. You only have today, if you're lucky, and that's it. So adjusting to life and to this way of thinking was very challenging because obviously when you live in a life that is like living in London, everything is so quick and fast and everyone is just doing everything so quickly. You have to book for like going and seeing someone. Everybody's calendar is so full. You have to, if you want to see somebody, they're not free until the next 3 months. Having come from a time that I didn't have anything to do. I mean, for about 6 years, the only thing I worried was what to have for lunch, which book to read, what exercise to do, and what movie to watch, and that's it. So it was pretty challenging to get back to what everybody else does to live, which I don't think I have still got used to it yet.
Do you think you feel now, having come out, do you feel the sense of duty to campaign for and raise awareness of others who are unjustly held in Iran?
I do. I consider myself lucky that I had a campaign to be my voice and to tell my story and what I was going through and all the injustice, thanks to my husband and everybody else who helped us campaign, to be the voice of what I was going through, but not everyone had and still have that privilege. I have met many women in prison that no one in Iran knows their name, and I felt obliged and committed that I have to be their voice. So when I first came out on the plane, as I was coming out of Iran, I talked about Murat Abbas, who I'm sure we will talk about him later on, who was an Iranian British, but he was left behind, and he wasn't on that flight with us. But also many other women that I served my imprisonment with them in prison, who are still in prison. And I think the justice that I went through, they are going through still on a daily basis. And I am responsible for being your voice.
And talking of Murat Abbas, of course, after you were released, he remained imprisoned. And in one of your first press conferences after your release, you actually asked for his family to be present at that conference. In the time that followed since then, do you feel as though the UK government has learnt anything from your ordeal?
So like I said, Murad was left behind. And the reason for that was Murad also had American nationality. And they felt at the time the government would have been better off if they considered him throughout an American prisoner swap as opposed to the British one. And that's why they kept him, and he was only released a year and a half later from the day that I came home. But there are still so many other people in Iran in prison. We have got Nazanin Zaghari, who is an Iranian German. We have got Mr. Shahmad, who is Iranian German. We have got someone who is a single nationality, Johan Flodres, who was studying in Oxford, PPE, in the past, and he is Swedish. But also we've got 4 French in Iran in prison. The hostage-taking diplomacy in Iran continues. And of course, we found out when I came back, we found that the British government did not acknowledge any of the mistakes that they have done throughout my imprisonment, even though eventually after 6 years, they paid the debt that they could have paid on the day that I was arrested. They did, open the doors for us to talk to them about what we think they should be doing, maybe the lessons they should have learned, but whether they thought that they have done something wrong, no. But then Richard, my husband, is trying to, together with me, that we're trying to talk to different parties in the government to make sure that there is a law in place that what happened to me will not happen to anybody else, and that any British citizen has got right to counsel protection. But of course, there is no guarantee that this will not happen to anybody else.
Throughout your ordeal, was it possible to retain this sense of hope and the sense of dignity throughout? Because watching from the UK, we really saw this resilience in both you and your husband. And I'm just wondering what that was like for you on the inside.
I think there are many things that make you, I'm sure all of you have heard about the sentence that Nietzsche says that whatever doesn't kill you will make you stronger, which is, in my opinion, true. There was a time that I felt first of all, my faith has always saved me. And I'm sure everyone has got something to hold on to, whether it is love, whether it is humanity, it's power, energy, God, any sort of religion, anything. Often people have got something to hold on to, hope more than anything else. But there was this powerful sense of solidarity within prison that I think that held pretty much everyone together. So we all came from different backgrounds, different family, different religion, ideology. I often talk about we had like a small praying room in our ward. We had dervishes, Sufis praying there. We had Baha'is praying there. We had Christians praying there. We had members of the Mujahideen group praying there. We had Marxists reading Capital. We had people basically having like a chat, and there were pretty much different representatives from different communities in society present in prison. But regardless of any of that, we have all come to level 0, and we were all equal when we were in prison. And I think there was this kind of very strong kind of mentality that we are together, and we are, regardless of who we were in the past, we have reached a point that we are exactly equal. And none of us has got extra phone time. None of us has got extra ration. And that, I think, saved many of us. There were people who would come to prison with like very, very short period of sentence, like 2 months. They couldn't cope. And then on the other hand, we had people like Mahvash and Fariba, the Baha'is, who were in prison for 10 years. And the moment that they left prison, they held their heads high and they left with dignity. And I think the reason all of us could hope in many different ways was the bond between all of us. And of course, the hope that this will end, and it will end in the end. But the solidarity and hope and faith, I think, were the key factors.
And how do you think your years of ordeal changed you as a person?
I think I somehow answered the question. I came out of prison thinking, I often also talk about this, that I turned 40 when I was in prison, and who I'm sure all of you, the majority of you, are below 40, but 40 is a turning point in anybody's life. I somehow get myself confused. Was this big change within me because I turned 40 in prison, or was it prison itself? I think it's a little bit confusing. I don't quite understand. There was a shift of mentality and the way we look at the world. That I think 50% prison, 50% age, but seeing people in prison who are struggling, who have gone through so much injustice, and they are still there strong, will make you a strong person. And you also become very sensitive about people's pain and suffering. I don't think anyone coming out of prison will be indifferent ever again in their life about what people go through. I think prison has made me a different person and a better person in some ways.
And both you and your husband have spoken about the UK government's handling of the situation. Do you feel as though you were used as a political pawn between the two countries?
Yes. I think the fact that in the end it was very clear that the Iranian government only let me go by receiving the money and the debt that the British government owed them pre my birth year. So they owed the debt in 1974, and I wasn't born by then. It was a very clear mark that I was taken as a hostage, and also in many occasions when I was in prison, I was told very, very directly towards the end of my incarceration that they were putting pressure on me to put pressure on my husband, to then indirectly put pressure on the British government to pay the debt, because they were very clear that until such time that the debt is not paid, you will not be going anywhere. And that was the case. They did not release me until they received the debt.
And equally, after the death of Mahsa Amini, Iranian women and people took to the streets in protest. How did that wave of protests going on the outside affect your life in the women's ward on the inside?
So I was out when that happened. I was very lucky to be released and to be free back home. It was about 6 months, I think, when Mahsa Amini died, was killed. I had news from inside prison that the number of new arrests had rocketed up, and they have, more people coming to prison. But also, there is always this very strong sense of solidarity within prison with whatever is happening outside the walls. So if there is any political movement happening in Iran, the ward would want to show solidarity. So the least they could do is to issue statements and to show solidarity with, the mass protests, mass arrests, and in worst case scenarios, execution, which were happening in Iran at the time. I've got news from them that their phones were cut, their visits were cut, and when the fire happened in Evin prison, it was pretty horrific experience what my friends were experiencing in prison. So I think it was, it's also very hard when you are a political prisoner stuck in prison, not being able to do anything exactly when you think that you should be in the streets doing something. So I think they were feeling very frustrated, and within means of what they had available, it was basically chanting in the yard, condemning the regime, sending statements out, and then getting there were some cases that they were even new trials, new court cases open for them because they were being they were protesting what was happening outside. But it was somehow, I personally feel very proud of them, because I think it was the momentum that what was happening in Iran, a political prisoner could not be quiet about, and they indeed were not quiet about it.
You spoke recently with the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Was there any catharsis in speaking to him and explaining your experience, and how did that discussion go?
Well, I was criticized for going and talking to Boris Johnson. The reason for that was people who thought that Boris Johnson had let me down were telling me that, why do you want to go and see him? For me, there was this, as you said, there was this feeling of I needed to be at peace with my own conscience. So I wanted him to listen to me. Obviously, he didn't apologize. I was not after his apology. His apology would not change my life. He had, by his inappropriate comments, inaccurate comments, he had put my life in trouble for about 4 years. So an apology wouldn't help me. I mean, what he had done, he had damaged my life for 4 years in many different ways. But what I wanted was for him to listen to me. And in fact, he did listen to me. I wasn't expecting it. He gave me an hour, and within that time, I explained how his remark at the parliament that day changed my life, and I lived under the terror of his comments. It wasn't something that he then later on said, oh, I didn't mean that, I meant this. It wasn't anything like that. The Iranian regime stuck to what they wanted. They got what they wanted from what he said, and they used it against me. And that was exactly something that I was trying to, for about 18 months, trying to tell them that I haven't done this. And in fact, he listened to me. And I think my conscience was very clear that I have eventually told him what I felt, and he had listened. So it's between himself and his conscience what he wants to do with what I said to him. Who knows? I'm sure he had to deal with so many bigger issues than what I told him that day. But at least I was very content that I was given the opportunity, and I talked to him. So for me, the fact that he listened to me and he gave me the time, because as we all know, Boris Johnson talks a lot and he doesn't really let people talk. But he Yeah, he did listen to me that day.